You probably had that time where you're minding your own business, I don't know what you were doing, but then someone walks into the picture. He's this very flamboyant character, okay? He has whatever the clothes are called, the very hype beast looking clothes. He has a sweater on or a jacket, has AirPods in, and he walks towards you with pure confidence. Then he initiates a conversation. How are you going today? You listen and just say, I'm going good. How are you? And then he says this. I just got back from work today. I'm gonna go spend it at the club. I'm gonna go do all this and that. And that bores you because you're like a very well-mannered human being, right? You don't like doing hedonistic things. And so you tell him that's kind of gay or whatever. I don't know what you say. You just refute saying, I'm not into clubbing, okay? And then he starts talking about all the women he had and all the money, blah, blah, blah. It starts to become a little bit repulsive. We've all had someone talk about their own materialistic gains and use it as a form of social status. And here's the thing that's interesting. Let's bring you back to the 1800s, 200 years ago. In fact, let's bring your friend with you as well, the hype beast guy. He just told you about the club. What if you both, the two of you, spoke to a Welsh coal miner? You go through the time machine portal, no one sees you because that'd be kind of weird. Then you walk into the mines. You see this guy with this pickaxe, okay, over his shoulder. He's walking up to you and he's like, how's it going, lads? I just got done with a 12-hour mining session. I'm going to go home to the kids and feed them. Now, imagine your hype beast friend walking up to him and saying something like, I'm about to go clubbing. I'm going to get all these different chicks. The Welsh coal miner would be repulsed, and so would everyone else in that Welsh village. Why? Well, the reason I'm making this video is because materialism and modern social status is very new and very different to what it's supposed to be. Basically, if you don't know, materialism only started being a thing in the modern era, okay? You didn't see people in the Roman times brag about how much money they had, how much women they slept with. Even though there might have been a few, it wasn't a common thing, okay? But nowadays, everyone defines social status in these ways: wealth, abundance of romance, attractiveness, which that one does make sense in a way. And I would say skill still exists as a form of social status, but it's not very strong. And you can tell this is the case because what was the thing that we all spoke about when we were teenagers as men? Okay, we were like, oh, if I lose my virginity at a young age, that will mean I'm cooler than everyone else, even though it doesn't, and you're a total dork for doing that. you know, that is the modern definition of social status. And if you're kind of new to this topic, you're kind of new to the fact that we're speaking out against it, then I'm going to explain something to you. This idea is invasive, okay? And I want you to avoid the modern culture. Let me explain. Basically, let's go back to the 1800s, right? With your Welsh coal miner. Social status back then was purely defined by the family you raised, as well as your last name, okay? You always hear people talk about how back then, if your son got into trouble, then that would damage the family name. That's what made the average person, in a sense, I guess, a leader. It was about how much hours they're able to work for their family, and it made sense at the time. But nowadays, social status, like I said, is about abundance of wealth and dating options. Back then, it was the complete opposite. It was about your wife, your marriage. It wasn't about all these random different external forms of validation. This is a very new idea. But here's the thing about these two different forms of status. The older form of social status was so much more healthier for the tribe and the group, while the newer form is healthy for nobody. It doesn't benefit anyone. And it makes sense because in the Victorian times, like I said with the Welsh coal miner, if everyone has a strong family and they're all fighting to make sure that the kids are well nurtured and safe, making sure that they grow to be adults, then the community itself will grow, okay? It will be strong. It will flourish. Meanwhile, nowadays, if everyone's chasing over money and different pieces of material value, then what does that do to the community? Do you think the community would last very long? Do you think it would get stronger? No, it wouldn't. It would splinter off, right? Because now these guys are chasing external desires, not trying to better the people in their community. It's all about them, which makes sense. We're all very selfish creatures. We're very self-centered. But in this case, if we're purely chasing egoism and materialism, then that won't actually benefit anybody. And previously, I said that it wouldn't benefit you either. Let me explain why. Once you start gaining wealth and attraction, it's a massive compound effect. It goes upwards. But here's the thing. Once it hits its peak, it starts going down. And that doesn't mean you're going to start losing money or that attraction. All it means is that the meaning of what you just acquired dies out because it's not living, right? It's not like a child where you just birthed this thing out of your wife and now you have to raise it, you know? It's not like a child. And the only thing that you're actually helping grow is the business you're managing. Okay, that's it. So eventually, once that material gain loses its value in your mind, you are going to lose your own meaning because you spent your entire life chasing that thing. And now it's biting you in the back because what are you going to do with your life now? You're just going to sit there and keep chasing pleasure? What's the point? There's a reason I wanted to get this out there because your friends will chase materialism no matter what. Okay, they're not. I'm not trying to sound insulting to them, but they're not very educated. This is just the modern consensus, right? The modern culture. It's funny because when people think of Western culture nowadays, they just think of materialism, but it never was like that. You know, materialism is a very new topic. It's a very new idea that's designed to subvert us. Okay, you need to understand this because yes, having nice things is awesome. I want a Porsche. Okay, that car is great, but the pursuit of it itself is dangerous. Constantly pursuing it will cause you to lose your own self identity. And that's why I remember in high school, I always observed that kind of person, right? The average, I guess you can call them normie. I don't like using that term, but the average person, right, who would spend their time chasing these desires, right? They'd go to parties, get drunk, just dopamine, 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 dopamine. I never really saw them as very sophisticated or smart people. Not to insult them, you know, I just thought it was kind of weird. I always thought that eventually that's going to bite them in the back, and I didn't want to end up like that. And that's why I just went the other way. And if you're not like me, or other people who've ended up like me, and you're chasing materialism at the moment, I want you to kind of pause for a second. You don't need to stop doing it, okay? You just need to pause for a second and think to yourself, is this benefiting me? Do I feel good doing this? And eventually, the more you do that, the more it will kind of disappear. Now, I'm going to touch on the subversive nature, right, of materialism. This is how it affects a society. Let's think about this for a minute, because I really like thinking about this stuff. Materialism, like I said, is very individualistic, right? And not in a good sense either. Normally, when we think of good individualism, we think of self-improvement, right? The betterment of oneself. But bad individualism is when you suck up all the resources just so you can waste it on yourself. And we can see this in modern society because you have all these rich people, right? And congratulations, you're very wealthy. I admire that. But with these people, all that money that they just gained could go towards the community in itself. All their intelligence, they could teach it to other people. Sometimes they do end up doing that. All the things that they gained, if it's wasted in the physical realm, then what's the point of doing it? So thus, it actually impacts the society in a negative way. You know, that's the first one. That was very obvious. That's the one that most people complain about. You know, oh, the top 1%, whatever. Materialism also destroys character. All right, let me bring this up to you. Have you ever wondered why you go to the club maybe, and you wonder why all the women there they can't last in a relationship for more than maybe a month or 3 months or even a year maybe? That is because when you're chasing, like, I think this is one of the worst forms of like material chasing. When you're chasing relationships constantly, right? Like you're very superficial about the partner you date, then it will destroy your chances of just getting married, you know? And by superficial, I mean stuff like, you know how women will, you know, this isn't, I'm not trying to sound like one of those, you know, morons who get envious of other people because I'm not. I'm not envious. But women in particular, they always want one. I don't want to sound pathetic. Oh my goodness. When your attraction gets diminished to like a type of sexual desire like that, then your chances of getting married decreases. All right. And men do the same thing as well. You always see these men talking about, I want myself an Asian chick, or I want myself this and that doesn't actually contribute to, you know, marriage in a sense. They're not thinking long term. And there's a reason I'm bringing this up, okay? It's because if tons of people are like this in a society where they're all chasing superficial needs, whether that's through wealth or through relationships, then they're not thinking long term and it destroys their future. And of course, this does not mean you have to have low standards. High standards are different, okay? And by standards, I'm talking about things like I want it to be intelligent, so it serves the family. I want it to be feminine, blah, blah, blah. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to standards. However, superficiality, or however you want to pronounce it, has nothing to do with standards. It's about seeking and pleasure, right? Once you understand this, you'll realize why, dating is broken. Although I don't think it's completely broken. I'm actually quite, hopeful. But that's why you think so much people just can't stay in long-term relationships, because once again, materialism, and thus marriage dies out. And then there's a third problem from materialism, okay? Now, let's imagine for a second that you have your own empire, right? And it's already this massive giant thing, it's very, very strong. You've conquered all of Europe and now you're going for the Middle East. Think about this for a minute. What if suddenly all your people stopped trying to work for the betterment of their community and instead they all chased the same goal? They wanted to get rich. Now, wealth, I think, is very important for us to fight for wealth nowadays, because the economy is that bad that we should try to attain as much income generation as possible just so it can serve our families. But when people are doing this for the self, right, as an entire society, it only causes the empire to decay, because now everyone has the same desires, the same superficial desires, and they're not actually trying to improve their community. And thus, when something's not growing, it decays. And then the fourth and final problem with modern materialism and why you should avoid the modern culture is that there is no longer meaning in things that are built, in things that are made. It's there to serve a purpose. Back then, the average house had arches everywhere, the windows were pretty, it looked great, as well as the average church. The average church building had arches everywhere. The stained glass was beautiful, and it was all designed to captivate the feeling of community and spirituality, right? It was things outside of the human nature. But nowadays, when you look at a modern building, everything is so flat, so plain. Skyscrapers don't bother me. I kind of like them, actually. I think they look awesome. But the average brutalist designed building, okay, which brutalism isn't even a Western thing. That's like I think it's a Judaic thing, right? Came from the Marxists. But brutalism, when you look at it, it doesn't please your eye. Sometimes it might look interesting, and honestly, I think it can, but it doesn't please your eye, and nor does it give you the sense of community or belonging. And that's because that building was designed to serve merely convenience. And that's connected to materialism, because let's say if you want to generate as much money as possible, you wouldn't be building these beautiful stores with like nicely designed architecture, unless you're like, I don't know, Singapore or some very special micronation. You wouldn't be doing that. Instead, what you would do is that you would design it to be as convenient as possible. Let's go put a supermarket right there. The first thing that people will see is a supermarket. And right next to that, we're going to put a luxury store, right? And thus, it's going to pull people in. So, what's the lesson today? I want you to avoid material desire. And like how I said, it's not wrong to get yourself a Rolex. I'm not against wealth. Just don't chase it. Don't be of the modern culture either. Instead, you should go on your own path and study your ancestors and follow what they believed, okay? There's a reason why I think your ancestors are important, because everything they did is an inversion of what you do nowadays. But here's the difference. What they did worked. What you're doing doesn't. So that was the first video on this unfiltered channel. I enjoyed that. It was very good. If you want to see more rants like this, I guess you can click the like button, and tell me if you agree with me in the comments, okay? Keep never quitting.